shallow, but Louise had one that penetrated down to her breastbone. Her body had stab wounds on her breasts, breastbone, and abdomen, totaling 13 wounds. Charles had 21 total punctures on his body, mostly on his neck and chest. Vernon had no puncture wounds.
How does one person control these three people? That's very weird, too.
The stab wounds on Louise were before she died. She had a broken arm and shoulder, indicating defensive wounds. She had definitely struggled and tried to fight off the attacker. Her thighs were badly bruised. And of course, in 1966, there were no rape kits. We really don't know for certain if she was beaten that badly or if those marks were the result of an extremely violent sexual assault.
Right. I mean, they were literally like, it doesn't look like she's been sexually assaulted. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what they're working with in 66.
Items found at the crime scene included Louise's glasses, Vernon's wallet, but no cash inside, Charles' wallet, and all three had watches. Louise had a change purse. A whiskey bottle was placed on Louise's neck. Charles' crutches were placed in an X pattern across his body. And Vernon had a piece of iron scrap sitting like on his neck.
Yeah, see, that's intentional, obviously, and the different objects like that.
And investigators are going to be baffled by this because they don't know, like, is this just someone kind of fucking with us, or is there a reason behind this? Does this represent something?
Yeah, does this mean something to the killer?
I mean, people initially were talking about how they thought this was some sort of like satanic ritual killing or something. I mean, like with the semicircle and the way they were positioned, that there was something even more sinister at play.
Well, yeah, I mean, you take alcohol and a natural element, kind of like iron. I mean, that really could just happen to be the object at hand, or it could, maybe it does mean something to somebody.
2 teenagers would later come forward and say that they had left church services about 9 p.m. on Sunday night. They drove by the dirt road where the 3 bodies were discovered, and they had seen a 1963 Pontiac, light blue in color, parked by the road. Another witness said more cars were in the same spot around 5:45 a.m. on Monday morning when this witness was heading into work. He said there were several men standing on the road, but he didn't know any of them.
Oh, so he's talking a group of people.
Yes.
Oh.
Before the bodies were found, Shipman's Fairlane turned up miles away near downtown Hendersonville. And this was on Wednesday. That was the day that he was reported missing by his father. The car had been parked in the location since Monday morning. Keys were in the car. The back seat was pulled forward. A jack was found in the trunk later, which was believed to belong to a 1961 Pontiac.
Oh, interesting.
Another jack was found near the floorboard. 2 hubcaps were missing, and the tires were muddy. 2 fingerprints were found on the rearview mirror. Paul Mall butts were found in the ashtray. The car had about 259 miles on it.
That's all?
Well, here's the kicker. They had an oil change on Friday the 15th, just before the murders, and they had noted the mileage.
Oh, wow.
So an extra 259 miles had been put on the vehicle since Friday.
Oh, wow, that's an important piece of information.
From Shipman's house to Lake Summit was around 40 miles.
So these investigators, I tell you what, they're pretty damn sharp there in Hendersonville in 66, because they're basically, controlling. The car is always a good find when you're looking for a missing person, and they are not playing around with the clues and evidence left behind in this car.
Now, I'm not sure how true this is, and probably investigators are not sure either, but about 9 months after the fact, some teenagers claimed that they had found the car on Sunday night and took it for a joyride, and they returned it in about an hour. And that's how it ended up with all those extra miles.
Oh, well, that's a pretty big joyride.
Of course, gossip spread hotly around town.
Well, yeah, it's a small town. Everybody knows of these people. They're very, prominent and, I'm sure people are talking because it's a small town and these people are known to everybody. The people that are on the record store and, they're obvious characters missing in the town.
Well, the tea was all about the gay lifestyle of the two men, drugs, wild parties, and voodoo.
And there's all that.
In an area where homosexuality was not discussed or in the open, everyone knew these two were gay. I mean, they didn't hide it. Glass was known to have relationships with men, some wealthy and prominent in Asheville and Hendersonville. Investigators looked into the occult connection, a possible Klan involvement, and maybe a drug connection, as Glass was known to party at night in clubs in Asheville very frequently. At one point, someone had burned a cross in Charles' yard after he had entertained a black jazz singer at his house.
Wow, they just got all the elements in that story.
Louise didn't have any connection to the Klan at all, but her co-worker said she'd often make disparaging remarks about black people and greatly disliked segregation. So she was just a racist old biddy.
Again, what's she doing with the cool dude who's entertaining jazz singers and stuff?
She did have friends in Hendersonville, even having received her mail at the Mountain Home post office for a while. And, I mean, I guess it makes sense because Mountain Home is near Arden, and that's where she worked for that instrument company. So it might make sense that it was easier for her to pick up her mail there.
Yeah, it could be.
But others speculated that it's because she was so secretive and paranoid and didn't want anyone to know where she lived that she chose to get her mail there.
Wow.
Instead of at her apartment.
She was like a secret agent. And she was known to, if someone followed too closely behind her, like, headlights or something, she would pull over and see if they kept going. She was like paranoid, it seems, in some ways.
But they could not seem to find a connection between the men and Louise. Vernon and Louise both owned 1962 Ford Fairlane cars, and relatives claimed Louise would sometimes visit a friend in Hendersonville, but was it Charles or Vernon? I mean, she was so private, they didn't know.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows her business.
A witness would later claim to have seen Louise at a party at the Vanderbilt Hotel in 1965, a party attended by both Vernon and Charles. Another witness would say Louise had visited Charles in the hospital when he'd broken his leg. Co-workers said Louise would go to Hendersonville on Thursday evenings.
Yeah, she must know. It seems that she may know him somehow.
Another witness would state that Louise would hang out at Tempo on Thursday nights drinking wine with Charles.
They sound like friends.
Some of Louise's family said she might have been addicted to prescription painkillers.
Oh, no. He's getting her drugs.
Charles was known to have marijuana, benzodrine, and dexedrine at his parties.
Now, is that like speed? Benzos or something like that? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So some people thought that perhaps there could have been like a drug connection between the two. A source reported that Charles and Vernon would often supply drugs when they go to nightclubs in Asheville. Word was they may have been exchanging sexual favors for drugs, but again, this was a rumor.
Yeah, well, yeah. They're going to say stuff like that, even if it's not true, especially back then.
Other strange things, after Louise's death, a diamond ring was given to a relative that belonged to her. Now, the initials engraved in the ring, LDR, caused her family to wonder if she'd been secretly married a second time.
So that's not her initials?
No, her name is Louise Davis Shumate.
Yes. Okay. LDR.
She also had a bank account with $12,000 in savings, which would be like $90,000 today.
So she is squirreling all her money back, working all the time.
Who knows? But it's a lot of money for a woman who worked in retail and at a factory in 1966.
Yeah, maybe she was slinging some of them benzos on the side.
The fourth person in the car was never identified. He was described by witnesses as tall, thin, with light-colored hair, possibly wearing a blue suit. People speculated that the murders were ritualistic in nature. It must be like a satanic murder, the occult, because of Charles' connections to voodoo. Investigators ruled out this theory. Animal sacrifices and voodoo were typically with a slash to the throat, so the blunt force trauma was not really fitting with this theory.
I bet the dumb old country guys around was like, just one of them gay tannic murderers out there, them boys.
A gay tannic?
I'll be like, no, I done told you, Jim, it's satanic. That's what I said.
When Glass's house was searched, there were a lot of nude photos of children. But they were mostly like nudist magazines and fitness model like magazines of that time. And they featured naked children engaging in activities like hiking, camping, swimming.
What the hell? There's really books like that back then? Nudist magazines?
Yes. Well, in the like fitness model craze of the 50s, I mean, if you've been watching the show Hollywood on Netflix.
Yeah, you made me watch some of that.
The agent that's played by
by Sheldon.
That guy.
Okay.
Right? So he was like a real character, and I can't think of his fucking name right now, but he was like a real person. Like, he's not only a character on the show, but he's like a real person. And he was responsible for like the beefcake craze.
Oh, yeah.
Of like the 1950s. But yeah, there were definitely like these nudist magazines, these fitness model magazines that featured males like on the beach and stuff. It was very equivalent to like the pinup cheesecake photos of the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
And a lot of the stuff, like, you had to specialty order it.
Right.
Just like the Betty Page photos and the foot fetish photos of that time, the boot pictures and that kind of stuff that you see when you look into like the old Betty Page type of posing and that stuff. So this was like available, but you kind of had to know where to get it.
So would it be viewed as by other people as like adult porn? Or something that's
I mean,
classy?
because they didn't really have porn back then. I mean, you would have like, a 16 millimeter stag film that was really terribly made.
Right.
But they didn't really have porn magazines.
No. Okay.
So this was the equivalent of like owning porn.
All right. Because people were just like, what the hell?
Right.
Because they hadn't seen anything like that.
In most states in the 1960s, sodomy was criminal, so homosexuality was deemed illegal. Many people who were associates of Charles didn't want to speak to police out of fear, and that hindered the investigation.
Well, yeah, you could understand in that climate. I don't blame those people for being scared of being exposed or talked about, or, it could brought violence on them.
It was alleged that Shipman had compromising photos in his possession, but none were ever found. Investigative reports did state that Shipman had paid young men for sex, including giving them loans.
Wow. Well, I don't know. If it's two adults, nothing wrong with that.
Underage teens were known to attend Charles's parties. Witnesses would later state they had attended Charles's parties as young as 14 because he had a drug connection. And drugs were pretty difficult to come by in Hendersonville during the 1960s. Even though you think of, the 60s, the summer of love, the hippies.
That wasn't happening in Hendersonville.
Not in Western North Carolina. Like, you may have been in San Francisco and you could have found drugs on every corner, but not here.
Right.
Charles was known to smoke opium at his house and always have other drugs on hand. And we didn't mention this, but Charles was really into Asian culture.
Yeah, like big time.
Had lots of Asian art, would wear kimonos.
Meditate.
Was really into like Asian food. I mean, he loved everything about the culture.
Yes, he did.
So smoking opium was kind of part of that, went along with his interest.
Well, and if it tells you anything about the type of people and how the town was back then, even that his interest in Asian stuff, they see him wearing clothing and such, or they were just like, oh my God, what's going on with that weird guy over there? I mean, even that threw them for like, they don't understand it.
Well, what I find with small towns is you get some of that, but I almost feel like when you have that extremely, and we use the term flamboyant to describe him earlier, when you have like that one character in town who is just so over the top.
Yeah.
It's almost like people are just accepting of it. It's not so like, it's almost like people are just like, oh, well, that's just Charles.
Charles is crazy, I tell you. He's just one of a kind. They broke the mold with old Charles, I tell you.
That's what I find in a small town is that there's always like those few people who are just, everybody's like, those people are weird as fuck, but nobody really gives them a hard time or like hassles them because they're just like the character, the staple in town.
That's true, I think.
Just the quirky weirdo in town that everybody's like, it's almost like charming.
He drives that truck with 3 wheels on it. I don't know how he does it, but...
And that seemed to be kind of the case just from what I was reading, articles, interviews with people, is that was almost how people viewed Charles.
Yeah, they liked him.
He was just like this well-liked character.
Right.
A suspect to surface was a guy named Frank Myers, who allegedly had a fling with Shipman for many